Breaking news. Europe is useless, so Ukraine needs Biden to protect them. Joe Biden is currently in the UK for the upcoming NATO summit. No jokes about old people, please. I'm at an age now where I respect his resilience rather than laughing at his missteps. After the failed coup attempt against Putin, he will undoubtedly be greeted with an impressive show of solidarity and optimism. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has never seemed like more reckless folly. But the Western alliance is showing signs of weakness. The donation of cluster bombs by the United States has angered some of us, and Germany is hesitant about Ukraine joining NATO. Such disagreements highlight the larger issue of a fractured Europe dangerously dependent on the politics of the United States for support. Maybe it's his age, but I always pictured Joe Biden as the quintessential post-war president. He first ran for office in 1973 as an opponent of the Vietnam War but has since yo-yoed between peacenik and war hawk positions. He was against Bush Sr.'s Gulf War but supported Bush Jr.'s grand adventure in Iraq and claimed authorship of sections of the Patriot Act. After Iraq, Vice President Biden found his sense of realism again, privately warning against the bombing of Libya and even the raid on Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, just as the American public had done after Vietnam. He left Afghanistan after the 2020 election. That voters still want to run the world, but from a safe distance, was a major factor in Biden's election as vice president, and the bellwether president has correctly guessed that voters want to do so. Thus, Biden has responded to Ukraine with rhetorical commitment plus a carefully judged amount of arms, providing enough to keep Ukraine in the game but not quite enough, complains Kyiv. For example, the administration declined to provide F-16s on the grounds that the country doesn't need them now, but former Defense Secretary Robert Gates argues that had it started training Ukrainian pilots 6 months ago, F-16s might be making a difference today. The administration is concerned about putting Putin in a position where he will either snap and use nuclear weapons or refuse to budge for as long as he can. The current disagreement centers on who should succeed Jens Stoltenberg as NATO Secretary General. Britain is looking to hire Hawk Ben Wallace. We think that a less ideological, EU brand candidate will signal to Putin that an exit ramp remains in place, which is why Biden backed Ursula von der Leyen after London announced plans to provide F-16 training without Washington's approval. The West is willing to negotiate with Moscow if it so chooses. Naive, say the naysayers. If Biden had approved Wallace, it would have sent a message to Putin that the United States is committed to this conflict for the long haul, and that he should consider withdrawing from it before he is overthrown by a rogue chef. I still can't believe Yevgeny Prigozhin worked in catering before he ran a private army. However, the term long haul is unlikely to win over voters in Iowa and New Hampshire, where one survey found that 31% of respondents believed the cost of the war was already too high. Some conservatives argue that the United States is fighting the wrong enemy by using up its precious stockpile of weapons at a time when China is on the rise. They make a good case. Even though both the United States and Ukraine are low on regular ammunition, Vice President Biden has decided to gift some of these vile weapons to Zelensky. Last year, the administration said that the use of cluster bombs could be a war crime. Despite his populist leanings, Biden is currently unpopular and faces a choice between war skeptics Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump in the election next year. Even if the Democrats don't win, there's still the question of what Europe will do if the United States stops supporting Ukraine after Trump's promise to end it in the next 24 hours. Central and Western European countries are spending more on defense than they were even in the final year of the Cold War, an increase of 30% over the previous decade. Sweden has applied to join NATO, and Finland has already joined. Europe's commitment to energy security has resulted in the shipment of arms from the EU. Ukraine has rapidly altered our little corner of the world. While France looks foolish for continuing to pursue a diplomatic solution long after it was credible, Germany has damaged its reputation by dragging its feet on supplying tanks. Since NATO's moral hegemony has shifted eastward, countries like summit host Lithuania are more likely to meet their 2% of GDP on defense spending goal. To sum up, there is not enough solidarity or investment on the continent for anyone to believe that they could contain Russia on their own, especially since the developing world is neutral, at best, toward Russia. Meanwhile, the Russians appear to be better at defense than offense, and the Ukrainians are fighting valiantly but have not made any spectacular breakthroughs. A possible explanation for the conflict is that a rogue nation-state is seeing how far it can go by itself in defiance of the United States, rather than a return to power bloc competition like the Cold War. In spite of the EU's pretense to sovereignty, its citizens do not think and act like a unified civilization, so Europe lacks the ability to act independently. Since we depend on the United States for our security and, one could argue, our very survival, we should act civilly when the Emperor of the New Rome pays a visit.